Long was the trek from London to Edinburgh, but Mr. Pembleton had grown accustomed to it. He had been taking the Flying Scotsman from King's Cross Station to Edinburgh Waverley for the last 3 months now, and could predict every turn in the track. You see, Mr. Pembleton had recently suffered a tragedy most peculiar. Both of his late parents had perished in a fire that had inexplicably consumed only one room of their 20-room estate in Edinburgh. Now he found himself an adult orphan, burdened with the task of liquidating the estate's contents, a task that had grown wearisome but fruitful. Mr. Pembleton had grown so tired with the ordeal that he had found himself dozing off almost anywhere he sat. In fact, he had just woken from a deep slumber and found himself staring at a full cup of tea that had long grown cold. Mr. Pembleton rubbed his eyes forcefully before taking a large swig from the teacup, knowing it would not burn his palate. He had not remembered ordering tea. He had not remembered getting on the train at all. The last thing that Mr. Pembleton remembered was taking a seat on a bench at King's Cross and closing his eyes for a moment while he waited for his train to arrive. Nonetheless, he was on the train, and he surmised he must have boarded in a fog of fatigue, almost zombie-like. After all, the trip had become a monotonous routine. What puzzled him, however, was whether he had already presented his ticket to the conductor. He surely would have remembered that. He fumbled through his pockets, searching for a ticket stub, a clue that the conductor had already visited. But all he found was a solitary, oversized gold coin, foreign in design, and marked with indecipherable symbols. Though he had lost his ticket, Mr. Pembleton considered himself fortunate. "This will catch me a fair price, I should think," he said out loud. As his words filled the cabin, Mr. Pembleton noticed a commotion out of the corner of his eye. A dishevelled man stumbled down the aisle, uttering what sounded like nonsensical words. As Mr. Pembleton strained to listen, he discerned the man's incoherent chants. "Tickets, tickets, present your tickets out." Mr. Pembleton frantically sifted through his pockets, hoping to pull a rabbit from a hat and find his lost ticket, but it was, as he suspected, gone. All he had left was the gold coin, which he placed on the table before him. The ticket collector finally reached Mr. Pembleton's seat and inquired, "Tickets, sir?" Mr. Pembleton, who had been averting his gaze in the hopes that he would be passed over, lifted his head to see who he now knew was the conductor. Shock gripped him as he beheld the conductor's grotesque appearance. One ear was missing, and chunks of flesh were absent from his cheeks, revealing glimpses of his inner mouth. Mr. Pembleton, thinking that the man must have earned his disfigurement in the war, decided to act as if he had not noticed there was anything wrong at all. After all, he himself had served, and had seen many a man permanently changed due to it. But the realization struck that he must produce a ticket, which he had somehow misplaced. Mr. Pembleton explained that he had no ticket to offer. The conductor, with a puzzled expression, asked, "Then what's that there, sir?" while pointing at the gold coin on the table. Before Mr. Pembleton could explain the coin's origin, the conductor snatched it up and declared, "That will suffice," before hobbling along to the next passenger. Baffled by the interaction, Mr. Pembleton couldn't shake the feeling of unease at the loss of his cherished gold coin. He had not paid for a ticket, but the price seemed exorbitant, and Mr. Pembleton had a deep fondness for his gold. Infuriated, Mr. Pembleton stood and strode toward the conductor, who had now reached the opposite end of the train car. As he passed other passengers, their expressions revealed sadness and terror, which he attributed to their unfamiliarity with the deformities borne by war veterans. One passenger, however, stood out from the rest. An angular, tall young man with tear-streaked cheeks and bloodshot eyes, as if he had been weeping intensely. His clasped hands and desperate murmurs caught Mr. Pembleton's attention. "Please, Lord, I know I can do better. Forgive me. Show mercy unto me. Mr. Pembleton was not a church-going man, never was since the war ended, but he understood the hopelessness in the man's voice. A man who has abandoned God is a damned man indeed. These words, which he had not heard in many years, now floated through his mind as if they were said yesterday by his mother, and as soon as they appeared, Mr. Pembleton brushed them away, wishing not to think of his mother or his parents at all, for he had much guilt. Upon reaching the front of the train car, Mr. Pembleton cleared his throat and firmly stated, "I believe, sir, you owe me some change for my ticket." "Change? Whatever will you do with change?" questioned the conductor. Perplexed, Mr. Pembleton asked, "How do you mean?" The conductor replied, "Well, it won't be much use where we are going, will it?" "I should think it will," exclaimed Mr. Pembleton, now furious. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir," the conductor sneered. "You're the same Mr. Pembleton who had his mum and dad set ablaze, all for their estate, aren't you?" Stunned, Mr. Pembleton was rendered speechless. He had never disclosed that information to anyone, let alone a train conductor he had never met. How did this man know? A look of dread and of understanding now dawned across Mr. Pembleton's face. He should have known that his frequent naps were a sign of declining health. He should have known that something was awry. He chose his next words carefully, trembling as he said them. "Where exactly are we going?" The conductor's countenance transformed, growing increasingly sinister, as his once human eyes turned a malevolent shade of yellow, while his previously fair skin morphed into a dark, leathery texture. He then smiled a grin most gruesome, and uttered 4 words that would haunt Mr. Pembleton for eternity. "To hell, of course."